G'day mates, it's Busta here, and I would like to give Feels a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So do you experience stress or have anxiety or chronic pain or have trouble sleeping at least once a week? Well, you're definitely not alone. Many of us do. Personally, I struggle to get enough sleep at night and to turn my mind off. And so, I was pretty much searching for anything that would help. Then, I discovered Feels. Feels is premium CBD delivered directly to your doorstep. Feels naturally helps reduce stress, anxiety, pain, and sleeplessness. And now that I'm taking Feels, I'm sleeping a lot better. All you have to do is place a few drops of Feels under your tongue and feel the difference within minutes. The thing to remember about CBD is that finding your right dose is important, and everyone's dose is different. So leave room to experiment over the course of a week or so. You may need to take more or less to get the effects that you're after. Are you new to CBD? Well, Feels offers a free CBD hotline to help guide your personal experience. Feels also works naturally to help you feel better. There's no high, hangover, or addiction. You can also join the Feels community to get Feels delivered to your door every month. You'll save money on every order, and you can pause or cancel anytime. Feels has me feeling my best every day, and it can help you too. Become a member today by going to feels.com/scared and you'll get 50% off your first order with free shipping. That's feals.com/scared to become a member and get 50% automatically taken off your first order with free shipping. feals.com/scared. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There was no rest stops or cities, but I'd done the route enough to know where there were massive dirt areas every 40 miles, where you could park safely away from the road and take a rest. I decided to call it a night and closed my blinds and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to pry open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time that I'm parked, but I get up and peek out of the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain, but can't see anything, so I start the truck and I kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains, but peeking through the gaps. There's nothing, though. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked with sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? Anyway, after laying back down and convincing myself that something must have blown against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground. I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again, and the truck starts shifting like somebody is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of the door handles. Then there were fingers tapping on the windows and the chassis, and finally, the hiss of the air coming out of the suspension. And then, all of a sudden, it just stops. There's a few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every single window, there were these tiny human-looking handprints, almost like a toddler had licked their hands and stuck it to my window over and over again. I'm not sure what was out there that night, but man, am I glad that my truck withstood the test. So to start off, this happened around 6 years ago. I was 13 and my friends and we decided to hit up the local haunted maze for Halloween one year. We saved up for the tickets, which were somewhere around $20 each. Then we set out the day before Halloween. There were 3 of us in total, and we waited in line for over an hour to get on the ride to take us to the maze, which was about 30 minutes away from everything else, due to the size of it. We were stoked. And when we finally got there, we waited another 15 minutes to get into the actual maze, but then we started our way through. The only thing we could all think, though, was, wow, this is pretty lame, and it was very basic, at first anyway. A few hanging dolls, creepy music boxes, and some weak jump scares. But the further that you went, the scarier it got. They had trailers set throughout the maze that you'd go through and explore, and some of them were pretty gruesome, I'll admit. We finally understood, though, why there was a gore warning in the first place, and a need to know what you were allergic to, as we were sprayed with fake blood once or twice. Somewhere around halfway through the maze, though, a man in a striped sweater came out of the corn. I don't remember much about his costume outside of the dark hair and the black and the red striped sweater, but he followed us at a distance, didn't really say anything. It was definitely unsettling in a way that the other things hadn't been. There was a long distance between my group and the one that was allowed to go in after us, as they made people wait around 15 minutes between the groups to send them. We figured the guy would leave at some point, but it didn't stop us from checking over our shoulders constantly to see when or if he had. He didn't leave up until we hit an area with strobe lights, a sort of giant dumpster, and a chain link fence set up on its own, sort of like a little maze. And right as we walked by the dumpster, another worker hopped out and began chasing us through the maze. My friends and I ended up tripping and sort of piling over one another, and the employee was kind enough to sort of stop and help us up, then slowly walked us out of the chain link area. We walked a bit past it when the striped sweater dude was there again. He followed us all the way to the end, through this sort of tunnel where the walls closed in on you at all sides, then disappeared as we hit the last batch of zombies, which included one of our friends that was unable to come that night. After getting through them, we walked to the exit, and the sweater wearer was there again, but we had to actively walk past him this time, instead of him being behind us, and I just remember a feeling of just pure dread as I got closer to this guy. Back when I was 13 too, I had very, very long hair. I hadn't cut it in like years, and it was down past my hips. As I walked past this guy, he reached out and grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked on it, knocking me backwards. My friends stopped when they heard me fall, though, and ran back to get me as they'd gotten a bit ahead of me. And the second that we started walking again, the man in the sweater grabbed my shirt, and this time I flipped out. I pushed his hand away and booked it out of there with my friends yelling at this guy. Later on, we were talking to our friends who worked there about it, asking if she knew who that was, as all employees meet up before their shifts in their designated employee area to find out where they'll be stationed for that shift. And when I did, she looked confused, and then told us that none of her co-workers at the maze wore striped shirts, as it didn't fit in with any area of it, and all costumes are coordinated to specific areas. She said that she would look that night closer, but didn't see anyone that matched what we told her. And 6 years later, I still have no idea who that was, or what would have happened if my friends didn't hear me fall. I'm a 25-year-old male, and I started a job at a company that makes lenses for glasses, and immediately I was introduced to a guy called Nate. He was an awkward guy, around my age, that seemed like he had good intentions. I mean, he was nice enough, but I figured that most people humoured him when it came to talking to him. I was convinced that he was on the spectrum in the realm of Asperger's or something. I've had friends in the past who have had Asperger's as well, and I didn't really mind. Besides, we seemed to like the same things anyway, including Dungeons and Dragons. My D&D group was small, and we wanted more people, and knowing that he was into D&D, I invited him to come and join one day. My wife, then fiancée, immediately grew uncomfortable, though, when he came into our home to make his character, and when it came to actually playing sessions, another girl at our table also expressed that she was really uncomfortable with this guy. I didn't feel great about it, so after 3 to 4 sessions, we kicked him out and we just continued playing. But I still had him at work, which led to him always acting sad around me, but I wasn't going to give in. Eventually, though, I just kept telling him that I was starting another group and he could join that one. Yada yada yada. His pity party was starting to annoy me, though, so I said whatever to keep him at bay. Now, one day at work, he had the day off, and the following weekend, not me or my co-workers saw this, as strange as it may be, but when Monday came, he still didn't show up. Tuesday, no show, and this was really unlike him because he was practically a teacher's pet. Soon, one of my co-workers was moving around the warehouse with a phone in her hand, stopping people and sharing the news, because Nate had been arrested in North Dakota as he attempted to meet an underage girl for sex. We were all just in disbelief because, well, I guess that's the first feeling that hits you with stuff like this. You just don't want to believe that somebody like that could live in your town, let alone work right beside you. Indeed, he was in contact with a minor over the internet and set up a meeting at a park or something with the intention of having sex. The police were tipped off as a teacher just happened to see the messages on the girl's phone. I nearly puked when I heard the news because, well, he was in my home and made comments about my kids being so cute, especially my daughter, which definitely made me even more sick. He would talk to me sometimes about wanting a girlfriend and how he was just waiting for the right one to come along, someone in his church group, and now it really scares me to think how old this girl was. One of my friends at work mentioned how he went to install a washer and a dryer at Nate's house once, and when looking around, he was yelled at by Nate to not go upstairs. Not in a, oh, that's my room and I prefer no one go up there sort of vibe. More like, there's something up there and I don't want you to see it type of thing. Anyway, he was arrested and put in prison, like I said, and remains there to this day as far as I can tell. I guess it just goes to show that you can't really know everybody. And I guess that's what's truly scary about this. In the summer of 2016, during a summer camp, we went to Henry Cow Park in California to camp out. The day itself was normal, having fun throughout many activities. In my tent, I was with 3 of my friends. Their names are Sam, Mark, and Dave. We set up our tent in a small open area with a grove of trees. We were on the right side, while the girls set up their tent on the left side. We had s'mores and we just sort of hung out and then we went to sleep. And during the middle of the night, at about 12-ish, I heard something going through our bags, which were on the cable adjacent from our tent. Since it was late, I assumed that it was just an animal, like a raccoon or something, and so I just fell back to sleep. About 15 minutes later, though, Dave woke me up, and he whispered to me, something's pressing up against the tent. I sort of lightly pressed my hand up against the side of the tent, and then something pressed it back. I was obviously frightened for a few seconds. Then I chalked it up to be an animal once again, since we were obviously in the wilderness. We shook off the feeling, and eventually we just sort of went back to sleep. I know, kids are pretty stupid, right? Anyway, I then woke up at 6-ish and had to use the restroom. I opened the tent flap and was instantly greeted with the sight of some of our bags open and laying all over the floor. I exited the tent to investigate. I then thought about telling my bunkmates, and I turned my head, and the tent had flipped over onto its side. This was really strange because we had securely planted the stakes into the rings to hold down the tent. I then noticed that the stakes seemed to have been taken out. What was really strange, though, was that when we were asleep, we had not felt the tent flipping over. Confused and sort of worried, I woke everyone else up and they were unsure of what happened too. We set up the tent once again and went through our bags, but nothing from our bags was taken. So we just sort of went on with our day until it was breakfast time. We got our breakfast and went back down to our campsite. We sat down at the benches and tried to think of what caused the tent to flip over like that. I then explained what I heard and felt the previous night to my friends. That's when the girls approached our table and asked Sam, "Why were you snooping around our tent last night, and why were you staring at us?" We all explained that it wasn't any of us, since none of us had exited the tent at any point. We explained what also happened to us last night, and the girls were starting to freak out a bit. After a while of us trying to find some sort of a logical explanation for these events, we eventually came to the agreement that we had no idea what happened, and to just try and forget that it ever happened in the first place. My friends and I explained our experience to the counselors, who couldn't come up with any explanation too. And I've explained this story to many of my friends. We just have not been able to come up to a definitive answer on what might have happened that night. So this happened almost a year ago now, when I still lived in my apartment complex, which was in a nice area but seemed to attract the weirdest people. Basically, I live at home with my mum and my younger sister to attend college. There was a neighbour in the building across from mine, an older single woman named Susan. When me and my sister moved in, we'd hang out near her building with a former friend. She's worthy of her own story, to be honest. And so we developed a rapport with Susan. We'd bring her tea when she was sick and walk her dog, and I was next door neighbours with a different woman called Laura as well. Laura is a mother of 2 young kids, and she and her boyfriend like to sit on their balcony, overlooking the parking lot, and sort of smoke into the late hours and into the night. Well, one day, Laura was doing this at around 2 a.m, and Laura texts my mum that there's been an incident. My mum tells me and my sister that we tend to stay up pretty late, and we went to the balcony to see what was up. In the parking lot, we see a car that's halfway backed into another parked car, but almost at a side angle. Hard to explain, but I hope you get it. Laura says that the person who was in the car ran away as soon as they hit the other car. The car, however, remained, still running too. So, we're wondering what the hell this was all about. My mum goes downstairs to the car to check for damage when she sees a figure standing at Susan's building. It was a man that we'd never seen before, and he was just standing there. Turns out the owner of the sideways car freaked out because he saw us looking, and claims literally someone stole it and moved it out of the way so that they could have my parking spot. The next morning, my mum texts Susan about the incident, as the sideways car was kind of blocking her. She says that she knows what happened and has us come outside so that she could tell us. She's standing with the man from the parking lot the night before. He introduced himself as Eric and that he's seeing Susan. When we start talking, it turns out that he didn't actually know what had happened. He only saw someone running from the car, but that story's irrelevant now. We get to talking though, and apparently Susan had told him about our family and that I'm studying to be a therapist. I confirm it, and he just lights up. He goes on and on about all the similar work that he's done and thanks me for my service. He starts giving me names of places that I can go for shadowing hours and resources for getting a job. And finally, he tells me to use his name when applying for jobs in the future, and he'd get me a job at the psych center that he apparently helped found, which I looked up and I could never corroborate. He was very interested, though, that I use his name. Next, he talks to my sister. Susan had told him that she likes movies, so he told her that he had a small speaking role in one of those teen book-to-film adaptations that we used to obsess over. So, of course, when we go home, we look up his name that he gave us, along with the movie title, and where is he pictured in the film or given any sort of credit for it? So, we dropped the movie title and we just looked up his name. And it wasn't a movie that we found. No. Apparently, he'd been infamous in our town for years as someone known as the child biter. He had earned the name by biting an 8-year-old girl who was playing with her dad. And a few years later, he bites another girl and apparently stalked her family in a public parking lot afterwards. Another few years pass and he had a third victim. But we're freaking out and we text Laura, who's kind of a gossip buddy anyway. She has 2 young kids, so she's furious that this guy with actual criminal records was allowed to move in, though he wasn't put on the lease. We were concerned too, because a lot of the kids live in ours and Susan's building, and the question came up as to whether to tell Susan or not. We debated, but decided it was the best thing in the end. My mum sent Susan a long text about how we discovered what we did, and 5 minutes later, she calls us. She tells us not to believe the news articles and the court records and the fact that he pled guilty because he was politically framed by one of the girls' fathers who was running for some small office or something. My mum covers for me and my sister by saying that we looked up his name, the movie that he was allegedly featured in front of Laura. Susan demands to know why Laura's concerned, and my mum tells her to talk to Laura herself, so she does. So she knocks on Laura's door and asks what her concerns are. Well, Laura barely gets one sentence about how there are kids everywhere, and she's trying to be a good parent before Susan turns around and just leaves, just like that. Now, there are a few families whose kids that I babysit who pretty much let their kids wander the complex all day with no supervision. Unless I'm outside, then it's free babysitting apparently. We tell some of them, and they're pretty much enraged. And for 2 days, there's not a single kid outside. After that, I guess the parents decided actually looking after their kids was too much work and gradually let them play outside again alone. A few days later, an 8-year-old girl that we babysit, Maddie, and this poor kid honestly has the worst history with getting attention from creepy men. I think that they pick up on her terrible home life or something. And her friend ran up to us to tell us about a nice guy at the pool who gave them M&Ms. A few minutes later, Eric strolls up with his bathing suit, and Maddie tells us that it was him. We avoid eye contact, but he slows when he passes us. We warn Maddie and her friend in 8-year-old terms to stay away from him. Another time we're visiting a friend who lives in this building, and he emerges right as we enter the hallway. He puts on a huge grin and starts making small talk. We sort of awkwardly excuse ourselves and go to the friend's house. We go inside and our friend keeps looking at the window, and there's Eric, standing by his car, just staring through the window. Part of our babysitting includes picking Maddie up from the bus randomly in the week when we were asked. The bus stop is right next to the pool, and who do we see in a lounge chair with sunglasses, not doing a thing every single day at the bus time? Eric. Now, we're all kind of angry with this dude, and we contact the property manager who says that she can't do anything because he's not registered as living there. If he stays longer than 2 weeks, though, that he'll be charged for not being on it. And well, the 2 weeks ended, and then after that, we just never really saw him again. I'm still stumped as to why he told me to use his name as a reference when a simple search of his name shows all of his history. Again, I lived in a nice area in a small suburban town. No idea what it was about these apartments that attracted the weirdos and the criminals. Maybe it's some unspoken agreement for them to gather together there that we just didn't know about.